Right, Kevin, we are here and we are recording. First of all, thank you very, 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 very much for actually agreeing to do tonight. And I know we're going to look at some exciting images. We've known each other for a very long time, have we not?
We have indeed. I mean, the first time I met you was at the Belfry Hotel in 1988, I think it was, or 1988, at the Gold Awards. And I can still remember your picture of the bride walking through the surf. How's that?
It's a long time ago, isn't it? And then spawned Trash the Dress, as it were. Anyway, yeah, it's a very long time ago. And in the world of yesteryear, it was Kodak. Many people think that Kodak's just a battery today. But
I thought they thought he was a detective. Well, that's Kodak.
It's amazing how the world of photography has changed. But again, we're two very old blokes getting on a bit and things, really. Yeah. Kevin, before we get into the project itself, bring me up to speed on, you know, let's let our kind of viewers kind of know who you are. When did the world of photography start for you?
It's probably in the 80s. I started out mainly as a hobby, and I remember I was working in a factory doing engineering, and I joined the camera club. I met somebody there who took me under his wing and showed me how to do black and white processing and printing, etc. And I started entering competitions and doing quite well in the camera club. And somebody asked me to do some pictures of their children, and I started off from there, really. And I worked from home with my wife, and we had 2 young children. So she stayed at home, looked after children, and I was going out doing all sorts, you know, I was photographing, even going to people's homes doing passports. I was going out taking the background, lights, all in a Volkswagen Beetle with a great big fern in the front as well. So how I could have wished I had Photoshop in them days when I could have repaired the leaves that were broken off. And eventually somebody said to me, would I do a wedding for them? And I explained I'd never shot a wedding before. And I said I wouldn't like to take that responsibility. And he said, look, there's only a few of us at the wedding. If you just do some pictures, you know, we'd appreciate it. So it doesn't matter if they don't come out. So anyway, I went along and I did the shots, and they turned out nicely. And from there, bit by bit, I went out then knocking on people's doors, going around their houses, trying to get a portrait. You knock on the door and say, can I photograph your little girl? Could you imagine saying that today? I don't think so. But, you know, you get 4 or 5 people say no, and then all of a sudden says, oh, yes, what a wonderful idea. And in they come. And then I took out a studio in Wimborne when my father died. With the money I inherited from him, I put it towards purchasing this property. And I was having some, you know, some pretty good work coming through. My lab said to me, oh, you ought to enter some awards. And then one day a Kodak rep came into me. His name was Ian Powell. And he said to me, oh, he said, you ought to enter the Kodak Awards. And so I started it, and I had some quite good success on it. And then one day he came in and said, well, look, you ought to start thinking about entering the Gold Awards. I said, what's that? I don't know anything about it. And then the rest is history, you know. So, and, you know, I was always one of these people that wanted to learn. I wanted to be the best that I could possibly be. And I think that my thought process was always I wanted to be the best of the best. And I wanted to get better and better. And if I couldn't do it, I wanted to know why I couldn't do it. And then gradually, you know, my studio picked up, and I was getting lots of wins in the Kodak Awards, under 5s. In fact, I remember one year you chose me 2 of my pictures in the finals, and I won £1,000 each for them. So yeah, and then, you know, gradually I managed to get better clients and more expensive weddings. And then around about 2000, I suppose it was, I started, or 2001, I picked up my first digital camera. And I thought that was going to be the icing on the cake for me. I thought, this is it. No more carrying around 2 Hasselblads and 3 lenses and tripods and lights. But now I think I carry more with me on digital than I did when I was carrying the Hasselblads. which I do miss, of course, my Hasselblads. But now I'm shooting on a couple of Leicas. I've got a love-hate relationship with them. It's the first time I've ever got mold inside a camera lens. And I thought they're supposed to be waterproof, or fungus, whatever you want to call it. But Leica don't guarantee warranty for that.
So if we go back to the awards part for a minute, you were pretty much renowned for your portrait photography. And can I just say that when you said I chose your photographs as the 2 winners, I chose your images, not you. And I didn't know they were yours when we chose the images. Okay, we just happened to be one of those things.
I know.
But so you were pretty much a portrait photographer, but pretty much, you know, you talked about weddings the whole time, didn't you? It seemed to be the core of what you were as far as a business. But in fact, the portrait photography is pretty much what you made your name with, no?
It was. I photographed children. That's what I did. And I suppose in a way I was, you remember going to the Kodak masterclasses yourself, weren't you? And I remember going along to see Peter Lowry, and you know, I was just blown away by his work and admired him. And the other person was Neil Brightmore. And so the marriage between the two of them gave out Kevin Wilson, because I took like the finesse from Peter, whereas I took perhaps a little bit more of the edgy side from Neil Brightmore. And that's how it came about. But you're right, I did. It was mainly children, and then the weddings just topped it up. And I can also, you know, we used to do the dog portraits, the family portraits, families, you name it, we did it. And then of course we did the pastel portraits, what Brian Oyer brought to the scene. And I just wanted to be abreast of everything. But the one thing I wanted to do out of everything was I wanted to do nice weddings with really nice lighting on it. And I don't mean, say, for when you're doing the groups, but I wanted to have these sort of what I call my signature pictures, where I have those few moments with the bride and the groom, and I create something, you know, with a nice pose and composition, good background and good lighting. And that's what I've always tried to do. And I've never compromised on that. You know, I've tried to, people say, oh, we just want it natural. Well, I can do some natural stuff. But to that end, I employed a second photographer who would shoot at 45 degrees to me from the camera position. And so they looked like they were going to be candid pictures, when in fact they were really just a snap of what I was doing from the main camera position. Yeah. So, you know, and I've had some lovely weddings, and I've been to, I did one in Spain, I did one in the Falkland Islands, and Brownsea Island as well, Paul. But yeah, but for me, photography is a passion. Like yourself, I know how you feel about it. It's not just something that you want to make money from. Yes, it's nice if you do make money from it. However, it's more about the end result. And for me, the money was secondary. The images had to come first. That's how I've always been.
If we can go back to the studio and the portraiture and everything else, you're pretty much renowned for kind of a natural light photographer or reflected light photographer.
That's right.
But in fact, you had a studio as well. How did you balance being a studio photographer and a location photographer, or was studio just for wet days? How did you work all that out?
Well, pretty much you've just said what I actually did. But of course, you know, I realized that you can't always pre-plan a portrait because of the weather conditions. So I thought, how can I manage to get these pictures without, you know, compromising or losing the shoot? And so I developed this style of photographing children in old barns and disused buildings, and that enabled me to go out regardless of the situation, even in the winter. And I often felt that if the client was prepared to go out in the rain, I would probably get something that I wouldn't have expected to get. I'd have had something which was quite unique, because you know you expect to be working in. I don't like working in bright sunlight anyway, but you know I like to control the light. And you're right. So in the winter time, I mean you haven't got the leaves on the trees and things. So having the barn and a bit of straw on the floor, it was really good. And of course, always backgrounds always have been an influence for me. Background is the first thing I look for. And obviously I've got to have the light to go with it, but the background is where I form my composition. And I tend to shoot pretty much full frame and then crop afterwards. I don't like to crop in camera. I can look at my scene and think to myself, okay, I can see that there, but I can easily just crop that out, or, you know, I can take that out in Photoshop if I need to. But trying to get it right in camera is what I've always tried to do. And my lab, Phil Dean, at the time, he's no longer with us, unfortunately. He was a great printer. And he used to say to me, if everyone exposed their films like you did, he said, I'd be a millionaire. But, you know, we used to go out on a wedding and shoot 4 or 5 rolls of film. And, you know, they'd have 14 an album. Now, a good wedding for me, a really good wedding, top notch, she had to be really good looking for that. I shoot 5 or 6 rolls. And I used to think to myself, every time I take a shot, it's £1. So I used to try and save 2 or 3 shots for the cake cutting, and hope one looking at the cake, one looking at me, and then I had one spare afterwards. But I always kept that in case there was a blink.
When you said it was £1, it wasn't £1 how much you were going to earn. It was actually how much it cost for film processing and print, wasn't it? Yeah.
Well, I can remember when I first started out. I think I had three price ranges, and I think it was £60 for 12 pictures in an album, which was something like a Lincoln album, and then the top package was like 60, £65 went into a Claire. Do you remember them Claire albums with the velvet on the front? And of course, then as things evolved, and I got more confident in what I was doing, and I found that I started using Jorgensen albums and doing, so I was then mixing in the black and white and so documentary style in with the formal stuff, and that worked out very well. And I've worked on Jorgensen albums for a long time.
So pretty much retired now. I know you're still shooting a few weddings and portraiture, but you mentor quite a lot of photographers through qualifications now, isn't it, with the Royal Photographic Society and so on. I know that you're a bit of a kind of addict as far as qualifications and all that kind of thing. There's nothing wrong with that at all. What really made you kind of go down this kind of qualification route in your early career? I know you said you were in search of being the best of the best and things, really. Yeah. Does it all stem from that?
It does. It really does, Mark. And, you know, I remember I got my licentiate, and then I got my associateship in the MPA. And I wasn't a member of the BIP at that time. I think you've been a longer standing member than I have. And I eventually joined the BIP through Peter, really, and I got my associateship. And then he encouraged me to shoot for my fellowship. Now, I failed twice, okay, and I felt that I shouldn't have failed, but with hindsight, I know that I did deserve to fail. And I think that I've carried that mantra through now onto other people. You know, I make sure that if they're going to put it in, it's got to satisfy me. And not to say that I'm the person that, you know, is the guru, but I do know if it satisfies me, then it's more than likely going to satisfy the others. I mean, if you take about the people I've mentored, Paul Wilkinson, now, you know, Scott Johnson, Fiona Ingverson, Lisa Visser, all to their fellowship, all the way through. There's lists and lists of them I've got. But I enjoy it. Emily Hancock, you know, from licence.
If I could just expand on that for a minute, for those watching from around the world who've got no idea what we're talking about, we've in the UK we have quite a few organisations, like there are from around the world. We have the British Institute of Professional Photography, known as the BIP. We have the Master Photographers Association, which has now been absorbed into the RPS, in fact, which is absorbed into the Royal Photographic Society. The Royal being the oldest, in fact, of all of the actual bodies and things. Then we have the likes of the societies and others as well and things, really. So when Kevin's talking about BIP or BIPP and so on, he's referring to the British Institute of Professional Photography. As far as the qualifications that most of them run, in fact, they're all based on the same thing, which would be, let's say, 20 images. and there's 3 levels. So that would be the basic level would be licentiate, then there would be like the advanced level, which would be the associate, and then there would be the top level, which would be fellowship and things really. So in case you kind of need an explanation of the terminology, that kind of explains it all. We are going to look, in fact, at Kevin's Tannery project, which was his latest fellowship panel that he submitted and got awarded right at the end. Okay, so you'll be able to actually see that in full and things really. I think that explains it, Kevin, isn't it?
It does, but just before we leave the qualifications, I believe now, firmly believe, that the Royal Photographic Society is the most demanding of fellowships to get. You've got to have 20 prints and there's no leeway. I was quite shocked to hear the other day from some, I don't know if it's true or fact, but at fellowship within the British Institute of Professional Photography, you've got to have your 20 pictures, 15 of them of which have got to be fellowship and 5 have got to be at least associate standard. Now, that never happened when I went for mine, or when you went for yours. So I was assessing at the Royal not so long ago, and one guy failed because he had dust marks on his print, which he shouldn't have had, in fairness, but he failed just on that.
Perhaps we'll do another session on another night where we're talking just about qualifications, perhaps, and we can talk through selection of images. And so I'd love to have you back again, even before we start. Right, let's get on with tonight's session as far as the tannery is concerned. Tell us a little bit about, what initially inspired you to choose a tannery as the backdrop for your portrait project as such.
Okay, well, I've done several projects, as you know, but I thought to myself, well, I wouldn't mind having another go at getting another fellowship. So I thought, what would be good? And then I started to come across, I went to France and I went to a place called Honfleur. And when I was there, I asked in the information bureau if there was anywhere around that had some character type paintings. And they said, oh yeah, go up. And I went up to this house and I met this French lady in there who was an artist. She didn't speak any English and I didn't speak any French. And she was probably about, she looked like a sailor. I've never been in a house so scary as what hers was. And I thought to myself, oh, I've got to be careful here, but it was amazing. And the whole house, the walls, the windows, the floors were all painted, with her designs. And anyway, so I started doing that. And when I came back, I thought, right, I'm going to develop this project. So I started going around and finding some really good artists and doing some really nice pictures of them. And then I thought, well, actually, I could expand this into craftsmen as well. And I came across an MBE chap who was a wheelwright. And so I contacted him and I asked him if I could come down and do some pictures. He said, yeah, come on down. So I went down there and he was a lovely guy. And he gave me as long as I wanted. He said, you just do what you want, he said. And in return, he said, can you shoot my family? They're here. Can you shoot them in the workshop? I said, yeah, all right. So after I finished the shoot, I knew I had some good images. And I shot them on a 105 1.4 lens. So they were wide open, they're tack sharp. And as I finished, I always do the same thing. I said, you don't know of anyone else that's got might be interested in this? And he sort of ummed and ahed. He said, have you tried the tannery across the water? I said, what's that? And it's the only tannery left in the UK that uses the oak bark process. And they've been doing it since Roman times. So I said, oh, well, I'll try them. And I said, do you think what's the chance of me getting in there? And he said, well, they do get lots of requests to go in there. So they don't really encourage it, but who knows? Give them a try. So I wrote to them. And I explained to them, so I'm coming up to retirement now, and I'm just thinking about going for another fellowship. So I sent in some of my work of the 100-year-olds that I'd photographed, and 1 or 2 other bits and pieces. The prison project I did as well. I sent him those. And he said, yeah, okay, come on down. So I went, he said, get here for 7:30, because that's when we start. And of course, this was in October, end of October. The clocks had just gone forward. And no, fall back. They've gone back.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, and so I got down there, and I'm not kidding you, Mark. I didn't realise what. I remember them saying that the been doing it since Roman times. But on this site, the actual buildings are over 400 years old. And it was just like walking into a film set from Dickens, that type of thing. Old London, you know, all the old houses that are falling down. It was just like that. And as soon as I walked in there, I thought, forget the artists. So I stayed there for 4 hours. And because after those 4 hours, the process is finished and they go on to something else. So I came away from there stinking of this oak bark, and it was in the car for 2 or 3 days. You just couldn't get rid of the smell. It was on your clothes as well. So I came back and I looked through and I thought, wow, these are really good. You know, I love these. And it was my type of thing as well. I like old fashioned things. I think with a history to it. So I thought, I've got nearly enough here to do a fellowship. So I phoned him up and I said, can I come back? I've got some images for you. Can I come back? He said, yeah, come back in January. So I went back in January and I spent another morning down there. And I got the rest of the pictures that I needed. And then I thought to myself, well, I wonder if I could just push it and go back one more time. So I asked him if I could go back again. He said, look, we're just so busy at the moment. He said, I can't spare the time. If you're prepared to wait a few months, you can come back. But I already knew that I had enough. But it's like always belt and braces, isn't it? You want to go back and get a little bit more. But I loved the place. I could spend days and days there. And it takes 7 years for these guys to become a master tanner. It's an incredible process. It's filthy, it's dangerous, and health and safety, I don't think would ever go in there.
Okay, we'll just quickly flick through the images, or 8 of the images that we're going to talk about tonight. Okay. And then we'll go back to them and we'll talk about them one at a time and things, really. Okay. And then we'll look at the panel and things, really. So let's start off with the first image. Tell us the story about this image.
Well, that's Andrew Baker in the front there, and he owns the business. You know, he's the MD there. On the right of him is his son. So what they're doing now is he's got a complete cow skin there in his hands on the table. And so what they do is they bring this in and then they open up the skin and they decide on what bit of leather. That's all right. That's not a cow barking, that's my dog.
I gathered that.
Yeah. And so he then looks at the leather and he decides on whether it's going to be for handbags, shoes, saddles, wherever it's going to go. And then he cuts it up into squares or whatever they need, and then they all go off to be processed. And the guy behind them is waiting because that's been through a year's process. It takes 1 year for the hide to mature through to the finished leather. So
how much of this information did you know about before?
Very
okay. And do you think you needed to know this information while you were photographing, or were you just running on instinct?
I was running on instinct.
Okay.
And I thought to myself, if I'd actually gone in there knowing what I know now,
yeah,
I probably would have shot it differently and it wouldn't have been as good.
Okay.
So this is all as it's happening. The only light that's coming in there is from the windows on the right hand side. Yes, there is a supplementary light above. But the guy on the right hand side here, if you look just to the bottom right hand corner, you can see a little tiny buttress wall. The other side of that wall is the river. And so if you fall into one of them pits of the lime, the oak bark, you go straight into the river. And so it's really, really, you've got to have your wits about you. But the guy behind, he's waiting now. He's looking for the premium bits of leather, and then he takes them over, and then he shaves off the final few hairs on them, which you'll see in a moment.
Okay, so we're talking about the images. What kind of challenges was the lighting here for you and things, really?
Well, as I think I mentioned to you off camera, I'm always looking for the light. And so my ideal light is 90 degrees to the camera. Yep. And so I'm looking for the person. And so if you look at the guy on the left-hand side, he's got the 90-degree light, and that's coming through from the windows on the far side. So I'm looking for that. And then the light's still filtering through to Andrew, who's doing the cutting. And the light that's coming from above is just falling onto his son's face. So it was pretty over, but they're working. they're not stopping. If you can just see, there's a little tiny bit of movement on his hands where he's.
Yeah. Yeah.
In fact, I did shoot some movement pictures of this as well. But when it came to putting them all together, I didn't want to run the risk of putting in 2 or 3 pictures that were sort of not unsharp, but with motion.
Were you tempted during this scene to concentrate on the individuals, or were you just kind of concentrating on the group?
The group.
Yeah, the group, is it? Okay, cool. So then, as far as the lighting changes, are you manually metering for these images, or how are you working the technical?
No, I've got it on center weighted metering. Okay. And the only difference to this one here we're looking at now, I got a 6 foot by 4 foot silver laster light just to throw a little bit of relief back onto the shadow side of his face. But essentially, the light's coming in from that window. And also, can you see the hole in the roof? Okay, so that's what the buildings are like. And so there's a bit of light coming through there as well. So what he does, he throws that piece of leather, which is just collected off the table, across that beam, and then he uses a surf form to take off any little tiny bit of hair that's left on there. And as you can see, the river runs right alongside it.
Yeah.
The whole process is run by a water wheel, 400-year-old water wheel.
So as far as the photographic technical, are these shot on the Leica?
Yeah, they're shot on the Leica, 24-70 lens, 2.8.
Sorry, I overtalked the lens then. Could you just say the lens again, because you're moving back and forth?
Sorry, Mark. It's a 24-70 2.8 lens.
Yep.
Everything was shot on that, and I put it on. I put it on auto ISO, and I set the ISO maximum of 6,400, and the shutter speed to 125th.
Okay.
So within that area, I knew that I could shoot it 100th of a second handheld easily. But I thought, well, it was fairly dark in there as well. But it's amazing, really. You know, you've only got to be able to see the light, and then you can do things with it, can't you?
Yeah.
As you know.
And what kind of aperture? Were you fixing your aperture all the time, or?
No, I was probably on about 3.5 f4, something like that.
Okay.
I could get the data out if you wanted it, but I just wanted to make sure that that I had a sharp image.
So with the strong light coming in from above and from the windows, obviously with center weighting, you know, the exposure is going to really kind of be quite broad, isn't it, really? Because you're going to have very heavy shadow and basically obviously very, very bright highlights with it. What kind of restraints did you have in the post-production? Did you have any problems?
No, none at all.
Okay,
I
good.
was quite to be honest with you, although I said I've got a love-hate relationship with the Leica, and you know, and the menu system and everything is good on it, I was a little bit disappointed. I'm not sure whether the fungus and the mold came from within this area where I was working, because you know it's damp in there, and then I probably just put it in my camera bag and went home, and it could well have been that, but I didn't think Leica's response was very good at all. You know, it's about 7 days out of date, and they didn't want to know. But having the reflector to the right-hand side there was just enough to put a little time. And I like my lighting like that. I like it to be split lighting. I like 90-degree lighting or short lighting. So I knew that as long as I got the image there and my composition was okay, they're pretty much all full frame, by the way.
Okay. And the tone on the image, it seems to be slightly off black and white. Is that just the screen, or is that purposely done?
It's probably the screen, but the interesting thought about this, while you've mentioned it, is probably something that I should mention. These were printed on platinum palladium. So to tie in with the actual the setting and the time, this work's been done the same way since Roman times. Nothing's changed. Now you can see how cold it is in there.
Yep. What techniques did you employ to sorry, I'm just going through the questions that people have sent in advance. How did you select the subjects for the portraits? We haven't got to them yet, so we'll leave that for a minute. What techniques did you employ to ensure the best possible lighting conditions? Did you have any kind of, can you move shuffle to your left, shuffle to your right, or did you just shoot as was?
Okay, so if you can imagine this scene that's in front of you, that's a raised platform. It's like the deck of a ship. And that machinery behind there is where it flattens and thins out the hide. Now, I know fully well that if they're looking at me, I'm going to get really not a type of light. So I explained to them, when you're walking forwards towards me, I put the camera on continuous focus. When you're coming towards me, just turn your heads towards the window. And so then as they were walking through towards me, I knew I had decent light on their faces. That's all that I was interested in.
Yeah. And that's the kind of animation that you're talking about all the time as you're going through it, yeah?
Yeah. Now, interestingly enough, in the 1800s here, there were 65 people working in this place. Now there's only 7, including the family. So, you know, it's a really skilled job, very manual, hard work. And I thought that it would probably just be people that come in and work for a couple of months, but no, you've got to be 7 years to do this job, to learn it.
Okay. How did you select the subjects for the portraits? Did you have any specific criteria in mind when you were photographing them?
Right. So what I did was, when I was there, when I'd done that first dot, you know, with the Mr. Baker, trimming the leathers, while they were waiting for the next one and they had a tea break, I walked around the premises to see where I found these areas here where they stain the leathers. And so I then found out that this guy, that's what his job was. So they call it currying the leather. And so I went in there and I knew that you see to the right hand side, there's a load of leathers all piled up as well, waiting to be done. And then he's got these hot oils which he works into the leather, and it's an amazing process. But what I was looking at here was I wanted to get a real short light on him, and so I brought him right to the edge of the window frame and got him to hold the leather up, because he wouldn't work like that unless he was just moving it. But I got him to come right to the edge of that window frame, so I would just get that far side of his face lit. And then the silver Lasterlight reflector, they still go in Lasterlight. Yeah. The silver reflector to the right hand side, and the reflectors for me have been one of the best things I've ever had in my career. Really, they've been remarkable. So it was a case of, and I probably took, say, 4 or 5 pictures, and then I turned around, went the other way, and shot the other way, which we may see later on in the panel.
Okay. The window in the background, has that had to have post-production to bring it down because of obviously the restrictions? Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, bearing in mind it's October, there's not many leaves back on the trees out there. It wasn't too bad actually, because you can still see some of the bits of the building out there. But I just darkened it down in curves.
Okay. And this image, this is kind of, I would say, you know, quite classical Kevin Wilson, isn't it? Really.
It is. It's. Do you think he looks a bit like Trevor Yerbry?
No.
I do. I think he looks a bit like young Trevor.
Trevor Yerbry is a fine art nude photographer in the UK, based up in Edinburgh. For those of you who've got no idea. So yeah.
So this one here was this room actually, which you will see later on as a bigger scale. They'd stopped for their tea break. You know, and I said to you, I went around and looked to find the areas, but this is where they stopped. That actually was shot on the 105 1.4.
Okay.
That's the only one. And so he was waiting for his cup of tea, and I mean the place is a complete and utter tip. And I did think about removing things, but in the end, I thought, well, actually, it adds to it. And so I just left it. Some people say take it out, but the only thing that was jarring me a little bit was the paper cup on top of the waste bin there. I could have taken it out. I think I tried to do it, but I made such a mess of it, I thought it was better to leave it in.
Do you think the location in its own right is really the power of the the project, and then basically placing the subjects within it is really what the power was.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. Spot on. I mentioned earlier on that location, background for me is one of my primary considerations, and so I'm always looking for pockets of light, which I've got here. And I have got a reflector in here again on the right hand side, just to fill a little tiny bit in onto his left hand side.
And how important is the post-production in the edit for you personally, or are there times where you put your images out for somebody else to do it for you?
No, I do it myself, and I'm no good at it. But I did have some help from a lady called Sally Gainsford, and she's very good at Photoshop, and she taught me through what to do. And she sent me a video, and she said, look, this is what I've done. Here's a video. You do this and you do that, and then I'd send them back to her, and then she'd look at it and say, yeah, that's good. And there were some images that we liked, but the contrast between the window and the subject was just too much, and it would have spoilt the image. But generally speaking, all I do, again, off camera earlier on, we were discussing about my work is I get it right in camera as much as I can, and that's a great learning curve for people and that's where it came in, me going to people's houses and using window light back then, all them years ago.
Can you walk us, I'm reading questions here that we've had through in advance. Can you walk us through the process for selecting the final images with the submission?
Okay, so I mean, with the Royal, you have to give a statement of intent. So you've got to have an intent why you're doing it, and then an outlet, which is the purpose of what it was all about. So this was to provide, my intent was to record something which will not be here for much longer. This is the only one left in Britain, and it won't be here forever, and so sorry, what did you say?
So can you walk us through the process of selecting the images for the final submission? Yeah.
All right. Now, bearing in mind that these guys are actually working, so I would go in that, and I just got him to stop by the edge of that window. You see, just back to the edge of the window. I probably took 4 or 5 pictures of this, and they're pretty much all identical. So it's just a case of choosing the best from that set. I don't take hundreds and hundreds of pictures. I just take 4 or 5. Because I know that if he doesn't blink and I've got the expression, everything, I've got the image because I've set it up.
Yep.
Now, if you look to the left of that's pole he's holding, you can see the lime in that pit behind him. That's 6 foot deep, that is. And they're walking along these little tiny ledges, balancing, carrying these leathers. It's a very, very dangerous job, I would say.
There's a comment just come through, and it said they look like superheroes, and you've got a hero in each of the image, so it's kind of a hero in his scene. Is that something that you?
Yeah, it is. It's
kind of feel.
That person that said that needs a slap, a good clap, right? Because that's exactly what I'm looking for, that hero image, and so I pre-visualized what I'm going to do. And before I took this image, I'd watched him walking up and back and forth, and I watched it. I'm watching them, and I'm watching his faces to see where the light's going to be and where it's going to hit. So we're on to the next picture now. So this now is where the leathers have been hung up to dry, and they're waiting now to go to the chap that's going to curry them. If you look across to the extreme left-hand side, you'll see there's some crocodile skins there. Can you see it?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Now, this chap here, he's been doing this job for 40 years, and he was retiring. And so I said, can I take it? He said, what do you want a picture of that for? I said, because I think it's, he said, interesting. He said, you want to try working for this for 40 years? You can't. I said, well, I'll tell you what, have you bought your wife yet a present for your retirement? And he said, no, I haven't. I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll do a really nice portrait for you. He said, I don't want no bloody portrait to remind me of this hellhole, he said. But he looked the part as well. And I took several of them. I took some of him stood up. But I particularly like this one. And again, the only light coming here is from that window.
Were there, what specific adjustments or enhancements do you typically make during the post-production for the images? Was there something that you did as standard?
No, I just go through the files, and I go into Capture One, and then I turn them into black and white in Capture One. Although on this occasion, Sally told me to go into Camera Raw and to black and white conversion and use the color sliders. So just experimented, you can't do any harm. And so I did that with them and then saved them as PSDs. And so again here, I've probably maybe darkened down slightly to the left-hand side here, to the right-hand side. But it's pretty much, say, the good thing about this type of work is when you've only got a very small light source coming through, you can come back and the softness of the light is quite easy to control. I wasn't able to use a reflector here because I've got these leathers hanging up right across in front of me. They're on racks, so I'm up on a pair of steps here to get this shot. And the only thing that bugged me about it was the rack behind him. You know, I didn't want his head to go through that, but I couldn't get to a position where. And then I thought, well, should I take it out? Then if I took it out, I thought it was going to take it away. So I left it as it was.
Brilliant. I mean, that's the last of the 8, but we're going to have a look at the panel in a minute. I've got a couple more questions here. Looking back on the project, what do you feel were the most significant lessons learned or insights gained as a portrait photographer?
Well, what I would say there is that my portrait photography helped me immensely here. You know, my training over the years and all the work that I put into it, the effort, I know exactly what I'm looking for. And so I didn't really learn anything about it other than the fact that I can do it.
Okay. How do you navigate the balance between creative expression and meeting the requirements or expectations of the project or submission guidance?
Well, this is a very sort of serious job that they're doing. It's not one that you're going to be going around laughing. You've got to be working. You've got to keep your wits about you when you're doing it. And so I always find that an expression, I mean, if he'd been smiling, this would have spoiled it for me. So I purposely say to him, you know, I want you just to concentrate, look at me, and then I just angle his head round, you know, the old use of his hands, and move his face round, nod him up and down. But my training as a portrait photographer helped immensely. I'm not being funny, but I don't think anybody else would have gone in there and got what I've got if they hadn't had the career that I've had, because I do really understand how to use that light. And it's all come down to the fact of going back all them years, Peter Lowry and Neil Brightmore, and Neil Brightmore brought the reflectors to me. So that's the thing that I got from him. And then Peter, you know, although Peter doesn't do this type of work, but he had a charm about what he did, didn't he?
Do you have any specific preferences or recommendations for how your portrait should be displayed or viewed by the audience?
Not really. I just want them to be able to look at the picture and say, wow. That's all I wanted to say. You know, okay. It's up to them how they visualize it.
Let's step backwards and we'll look at the panel.
Mm-hmm.
He says, trying to launch it. So you've sent through the presentation layout. So how do you pass? Can you describe the approach to presenting the portraits for the submission or exhibition?
Okay, right. So the whole process of how I work is that when I do a shoot like this and I'm planning out for a fellowship, I then do a shortlist. So I go through, and the shortlist is, say, 4 or 5 pictures from the same setting. And then what I'll do is I get them printed full frame, 9x6, and I just get them done as the cheapest lab I can, because I find it difficult to do this on. I'm a tactile person that likes to see the print. So I get the 9x6s, and then I do the crops. So I use the crop bars, and I lay them on the print. I move them around to where I think they should be, then I draw a line around them. And then, so I gradually, after I've done that, I get down to the, say, final 2 pictures from each thing, and then I lay them all out together, and I put them next to each other and see where they work in the best light. So there's only one picture in here which I'm not happy with, and it's the very last one. And the reason I'm not very happy with it, it's not because of the taking or anything else, it's because of what he's wearing. He had a white shirt on, and I didn't want him to wear a white shirt. I wanted him to put his overall on, but he didn't want to put the overall on. So at that stage, that wouldn't have been in there normally, but because I was struggling, I couldn't go back a 3rd time, and I wanted something different, I had to use that picture. But although this is the fellowship layout that I sent in originally, when I finally presented them, I put them in his 10x7s on 16x16s, and I presented them in 3 rows. And it made a difference to how they presented.
Okay. So we'll get into the images now. Last question for me. How do you balance preserving the authenticity of the original image with the artistic enhancements during the post-production and cropping?
Well, pretty much the pictures are full frame, so I haven't compromised in that at all. Bearing in mind you're working in confined areas as well, so I mean, if you take number 2, number 3, all the way through, they're pretty much full frame. And the authenticity of it is I don't remove anything unless there's, like I said about the paper cup, that's why I left it in there, because that's how they are, that's how they're actually working. You know, that's the mess that they're within, and I thought it was important to record that. Had it been a wedding panel, on the other hand, well, then it would have been removed, wouldn't it?
Good. Right, let's have a look at the full 20 images.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us live tonight. It's been some great images here and things ready, and we will get Kevin back. I'll beg him back to kind of go through qualifications and panels and kind of submissions and everything around kind of awards and things, really. There's not much that Kevin hasn't come across or mentored in the past 30 years anyway. Yeah. So again, if you're looking to go through qualifications specifically within the UK, this should give you an idea on a kind of the content and the creative light and the presentation to kind of take it to that next level for yourself. And that's the last image with the shirt that you're on about, was it?
Yeah. I mean, he's a lovely chap, you know, and he was actually making a leather belt. He made it while I was there, so I watched him. And there's just the only light there is the light coming through the window. And but he just wouldn't put his apron on, which I wished he had. But you know, all the other guys have got aprons on. Ideally, you know, I could have said to the guys, "Oh, have you got anything plain?" But the guy on the left in this image here, he's got lettering across it. But as I said, it's the authenticity of it. It's what they do, and you know, it's.
Did you have a favourite image out of the whole panel?
Let's have an overview. Let's have a quick overview. I think number 7 was one that I liked a lot. Number 7, 6, 7, and 8. You know, they're all, because for me, it's the elements are all there. Everything's there that I wanted it to be. I mean, even the ropes. You know, it's the light on the ropes, and then I got him back so that his apron just wasn't going to get too much light on it. Originally, I was going to do it in colour, but then I thought, well, because of the actual history of the place, it wouldn't be right to do it in colour. And so the black and white, and then I was talking to Trevor Urbury, and he said, "Have you done any interesting recently?" And I said, "Well, I've just done this project." And I showed him, and he said, "Wow, you going to put it in for the Royal? And I said, well, that's why I'm showing it to you. What do you think? He said, definitely. So I said, what do you think about printing? I said, I was thinking about black and white. And he sat there and he said, took a couple of sips of his wine. And then he said, if it was me, I'd do them on platinum palladium. I said, that's a TV program, isn't it? He said, no. He said, I said, where can I get them done? He said, well, I'll do it for you. He said, I'd love to do it. And so he did. And then I got them mounted up night. They did look absolutely beautiful. And then there's probably in some ways the slides don't do it justice.
No, they never do they? No.
You know, it's I was thrilled with it. But you know, if you do want me to come back some other time, I've got the 100-year-old project, which I did. I've got the prisoners. I'm the only photographer ever been allowed in that Portland prison.
We'll definitely get you back, Kevin. I can guarantee you from the comments we got coming through. Loads of comments to do with the lighting is very artistic. So kind of, is there influences through the art kind of world that have had any effect on you, or has it mainly been photography?
It's mainly just been photography. I mean, I remember when I first started out and I was trying to win gold awards and things, I was very much influenced by the painters, Rossetti, people like that. And I thought I wanted to try and create work. And I think in a way that's the same from Peter Larry, because that's the sort of thing that he was doing. But basically, I go on YouTube and I watch photographers on there. I watch the greats, people from the past, and look at their work. But I was always inspired by Parkinson. I loved his work. Bailey. And some photographers I'd never even heard of before in the past, like David Hearn and people of his sort of.
So somebody's just messaged through to say, I met you once at a Maplethorpe exhibition in London.
I don't even remember going.
Well, it must have been something else kind of thing with it. It's the other Kevin Wilson, as it were.
Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Kevin, thank you so much. Anybody who's looking to get mentored in kind of qualifications or whatever it is, you can head over to Kevin Wilson Photography .com. Is it, Kevin?
No, .co.uk.
.co.uk with it, and you'll find actually the panels there, and you'll basically be able to get in touch with Kevin as well. I'll put a link on the Photographer Academy Facebook page tomorrow for you, so you'll be able to kind of follow that through. But
just before we go, Mark, one of the things that I did, I've in some cases, I've got people whose panels I've mentored to or even taught them photography. I've got the crops that I made for them and what things that I told them what needed doing to each image before they would become successful. So I suppose some people probably wouldn't want that to be shown, but I can tell you now, I put an awful lot of effort into all those photographers. That there's a bit of Kevin Wilson in each of them.
Yeah, very good. Kevin, thank you so much for your time. Some amazing images, great compliments coming through. And I promise you all, we will beg, steal and Kevin back very soon. We'll get him in to actually do another session on qualification panels as well with it and things ready. Thanks, Kevin. Have a great night, mate. Thanks for joining us live.
You're welcome.
See you all soon, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.